Tony Rodrigues, member of the Secret Space Program's 20 and Back program, is here with us today. I hope you guys enjoy what he has to say. I'm very looking much forward to hearing what you got to say, man. Shoot, Ceres? Series? Like the TV show? Like a series. Welcome, Tony Rodrigues, everybody. Big round of applause. Glad to have him.
Okay. Hello. It's good to be here. Got to admit, I'm a little nervous. You never know how much the crowd knows. It's a complicated subject, as anybody can guess. How many people here have heard of the 20 and Back technology or the 20 and Back programs? Well, so quite a bit. That's way more than I expected. What I've found is, what happened to me is I was about 10 years old. It was 1982. I'm from Michigan. I'm from Ypsilanti, the Ypsilanti area. And I was taken and did a 20 and Back. And I was not groomed for it or used for it for an official, like a professional purpose. I was taken kind of as an extra by people that had access to the program. Kind of like if they, if it were Coca-Cola and they were running through a special, a cherry version of Coke, and that they shut it down, they shut the program down, and they said, you know what, run me through 6 more cases for myself. That's kind of what I was, and the kids that I was with through the program happened. What I found is since I've come forward, I got my memories back in May of 2015, the major memory recall. I always had memories, but they didn't make any sense to me. When could I have been on a spaceship or on the Planetoid Ceres? I had chronological memory of my life. And so after I came forward, I did a few interviews, and what I found was that explaining the 20 and Back technology to somebody that doesn't know, pretty much everybody in America is, or in the world for that matter, is very accepting of ETs, any kind of spacecraft. The fact that we're not alone, it's kind of a no-brainer when you do the math on the stars, the amount of stars. Everybody can accept that quickly, but when you start telling people that you were taken and that there was a time travel component, you were taken, you lived 20 years, there may have been cloning involved, and there's a time travel component. They put you back, and you were only gone about 15 or 30 minutes from your home, and you were right back to being, I was taken when I was 10, I lived through an adult, and then somehow put right back to being a 10-year-old 30 minutes later. When you tell people that are unaware of that stuff, that there's a time travel component, you get the 1,000-yard stare. That's when the disbelief, nobody wants to believe that, but that's how I experienced it. And not being a pro, I'm going to skip ahead to help explain that for the people that are unaware of what I'm talking about, of just how it shakes out. There's a diagram. I'm going to skip to a slide quicker. The way I've opened up many talks is that, I was born in 1972. I'm about 47 years old, but I have 67 years worth of memories. And what happened was, let me use this pointer. I was born here, and when I was 10, well, it was a school year, I was 9 to 10, and 81 to 82. I went to school with a kid who came in, and I was in the Talented and Gifted program. TAG, they called it, and we met every Wednesday in the library for advanced learning. There was a kid in there who identified himself as the son of an Illuminati. He said, my dad's an Illuminati, what's your dad do? And we were boys at that point. He was very arrogant, so was I. I was a kind of cocky kid, and we didn't get along. Later that year, in April, we had the science fair, and his dad came in and was the judge. Our teacher for that program said he was the most pedigreed, educated man she'd ever met or even heard of, that he had more degrees than anybody she ever knew. And in the cafeteria that day setting up, he pointed me out to him and said, Dad, that's that boy I told you about. And he didn't like me. And it was that night probably. But anyhow, I was taken and then woke up without any memory of my mom, dad, my life, my sister. I woke up with complete amnesia and lived for 20 years in black programs. I did about 6 years on Earth and went through a few programs there, and then was sold off what they told me is I was sold off to the military and did 8 to 12 years in space. And I guess aside from the MUFON presentation, what I want to say is that there's already a human presence in our solar system and a vast infrastructure that exists. There are already colonies that are built in planetoids and on space stations in our solar system. There's actually quite a bit of commerce and quite a bit of people. Has anybody heard of Randy Kramer? A few people. So Randy was a Mars Force Special Marine Corps, and he says there's about 10.5 million people living on Mars at the moment. So what happened was, as I was traded, I went through program to program, depending on what I had aptitude for at the time. And I ended up living about 12 years on Ceres, where I worked on interstellar craft on trade missions. The first 8 years of that, I was a repairman, kind of a repair function on an older ship, an antiquated ship that was a converted submarine. And then when that ship was decommissioned, we went to a bigger, a modern freighter ship, where I was promoted and became a cargo engineer. And our primary, am I too close to this? Our primary mission was interstellar trade for technology. The Ceres Colony Corporation is complete. The planetoids in the solar system are broken up into corporations. So there's the Mars Colony Corporation, the Ceres Colony Corporation. The Ceres Colony was ran by breakaway Germans, and their primary mission was to trade with extraterrestrial races for technology. They didn't care what they traded or how they got it. There were many times that we stole from races. We outright stole from them. And because their mission was mandated was purely to get technology. So at the end of that 20 years, and that's how the program works, there was a series, they returned me to a moon base, a lunar base, and I went through a series of surgeries and put into a machine that was very painful. Aaron?
I'm sorry, the monitor's too close.
I see. How's that? Sounds better to me. And then returned to my life, and I woke up back in my bedroom. Even though it felt like 20 years had passed, I had no memory of it. I was returned right back to 1982, to the same night I was taken. And I remember waking up the next morning and going, this is my old life. And it felt like that distance of time had passed, even though I had no memory at that point of these 20 years. So I woke up here with no memory of this life, lived this life, and then was put back and had no memory of this life, and then lived my life. And during that time, whenever something traumatic happened over here, times when I was injured, I would recall it in my normal life. And but those memories, like I said, didn't make sense. The difference between, I get asked all the time, well, how do you know it's not a dream? How do you know you weren't just having a vivid dream of all this? In the memory, I had memories of how I got there. Memories of getting up in the morning, brushing my teeth, going to the bathroom, going to work, going through whatever event that I remember, and then going home. And that's not something you get in a dream. I'm going to flash you guys. Hopefully there's no epileptics. I'll start at the beginning and get going. I feel like I'm chewing some time up here. So that's the Planetoid Ceres. The base, the entrance, everything was underground. There was a series of cities in caverns. The Germans, after World War II, had acquired space flight. World War I was about money. World War II was about interstellar flight. And they lost the war, but broke away into the solar system. And one of the bases they found abandoned was the Ceres colony, which was built by some other race. And they went in and began to build structures and adapt it for themselves. There were about 225,000 people living there when I was there, and about 40,000 or 50,000 slaves. And that's what I was, basically was a slave. Up here is the Alhana Mons, that NASA calls it a cryovolcano, but the radial handle was Pyramid Base for the ships when they would return, and on the back side of that, there's a crater. I'll show you in another slide later. And inside that crater, there are smaller craters that they call cold traps, where the sun never shines inside of it. And inside one of those, there were large doors that opened up into a network of hangar bays that were miles and miles long. It was a vast complex. And then it went into a a military base that was connected to all the other cities around the inside of the planet by trains. So people didn't have their own cars. Everybody took a train somewhere, and then you just walked to where you were going. The entire planet is about 580 miles in diameter. It's a small thing. They had artificial gravity, and the biggest advancement, I think, from the secret space program to what we have today, the most significant advancement is gravity manipulation, the ability to manipulate gravity artificially. And that's what gives the ships the speed and the ability to fly like they do, and it gives them the ability to set up bases on small planetoids and not have to fight the gravity. That was me when I was 10, so that's about the age, that's what I looked like when I was taken. And that picture was taken, I think, in Boy Scouts, so that's something I dug up. I did not get returned in that happy mood, though. I was a different person. The day I was taken and the morning I woke up, I was a completely different person the next day. That's my house in Ypsi. So we had about 13 acres, and the night I was taken, we were being buzzed by a craft. There was bright lights outside. The phone, we had the old ringer phone with the long cord on it downstairs, and it just rang and rang and rang in the middle of the night. Nobody answered it, which was strange, because whenever it rang, my mom always got up and answered the phone, but she wouldn't answer it that night. There were bright lights outside, and I remember thinking, why is nobody answering the phone? And it went on. There was a certain time when it would stop, and then there was a blue orb that came into my room. It was a bright blue orb. It flew in, and I remember I kind of giggled with it. It interacted with me somehow, and I giggled. And then it flew out and down the stairs, and then there was silence. And I fell back to sleep and woke up. Let me see if this is the next one. There's my school I went to. I woke up with one of those guys in my face. He was standing over me smiling, and I thought it was, at the time, you know, my dad was a practical joker in those days. And I thought it was my dad with a mask. And I said, "Dad, take off the mask. It's not funny." And I reached up and touched its face, and it was wet and cold. It wasn't like a person. It was cold. And you could feel pores, like it had really extra large pores on it. And at that moment, I went to scream. I freaked out. You know, at that point, I knew there was some stranger in my room, and I panicked. And it hit me on the back of the neck, I think. There was some pain, and I was paralyzed, and I couldn't make a peep. I could move my eyes around, and at the foot of my bed had a dresser in it, so it was about 3 feet tall. And at the foot of my bed, I saw 2 or 3 of these guys coming around. And they picked me up out of my bed. They were smaller reptiles, stocky built, and they picked me up out of my bed and carried me to the foot of my bed where there was a bright flash, and I woke up on a table. I lost consciousness and woke up in a laboratory on a table. And I honestly thought that this was first contact. I thought, boom, aliens are landing. I thought that was the day, and the next day it was going to be in the news that they took me, and I thought that was a first contact thing, and the world was going to change. And so I was just excited. I was stoked. And at that point, they began to communicate telepathically and told me they were going to run some tests on me and to see if I qualified for what they needed me for, and they were going to take me for 20 years. And I said, no, I can't do that. I have my mom and dad, my sister. I can't be away from my family for 20 years and grow up. And he said, no. This one said no, and explained to me that there was a time travel, and I'd be back the next day, and that I was very lucky to be chosen for what they wanted to do, and that I would be able to tell everybody about the things that I did for 20 years, and it would be just the next day. So I agreed. They did a test. They had to wait for the results of the test. They said it was based on genetics, and that I just barely had the genetics. Apparently, some people have the genetics to do it twice, or do it 20 and back, and then live the 20 years, and then do another one. So some people can go for 40 years. It's a life extension technology that's been traded with extraterrestrial races for life extension. And apparently, in my case, it was abused, and I was used for slavery. And I've said this in other times, other interviews, is that I think everybody here, I think mankind as a whole, when you think about having the ability to take somebody and erase their memory and program their mind to do whatever you want, how fast would it be? How fast would your morals kind of slide downhill if you had that ability? If you could do whatever you wanted to anybody and then erase their memory and put them back just how you found them, I mean, would we all act morally in that situation? And I think that these government programs originally got this tech, back in the 40s, 50s, and started out, meant well to do military purposes. And like I said, like the extra cases of Coca-Cola that went through, people that have access to this stuff used it on kids like me to do whatever they wanted. Unfortunately, some of the darker stuff that happened to me afterwards is also my best evidence. So I will share it with you, and it's hard for me to explain it to people because in order to believe a lot of the things that I have to say, you have to unbelieve some things you know. And so I'll go on to that. I don't even know what the next one is. Here. I'm having a problem here. So after I had agreed to the program, they put me back on a table and put a sheet over me. It was just like that scene in Fire in the Sky where a sheet came over me and vacuumed to the table tight like a latex. And they cut a spot out so my eye was exposed, I could see, and they cut out my mouth so I could breathe. And they put a needle, like on an arm of a robot, and a needle went in. And it felt like, if you've ever been punched hard enough, anybody that's been punched hard enough to where you saw stars, that's kind of what it felt like. And, like I saw stars. And I woke up with no memory of mom and dad. I woke up in air base. So this thing's, Aaron, so this thing's lost batteries. Maybe that's what I did. There it is. There we go. Okay. So it turns out I was in the Inyokern Air Base area, and there was a doctor there, a tall man, who I've since identified, and I won't share his name. There's a lot of reasons. I've shared the names of people that I've found through the 20 and back and the locations with lots of researchers, but I don't do it publicly. I think it's just safer that way. But anyhow, there was a man there, was a doctor and a nurse, and he gave me a standard physical. I was in an old, like a hospital bed. It was a portable, like a small building. And he asked me questions. Do you remember your mom? No. Do you remember your dad? No. And I had no idea where I was, who I was, or anything. And he said, that's because you're a clone. And that I was going to be programmed to do some tasks. So I slept there, and after that, in the months to come, became a trauma-based mind control program, exactly like information that I've dug up on the MK Ultra stuff. So since then, I've been able to find the program and funding for some of the offshoots of that program that I was in, and from the CIA declassified online library. Let's see if I got this going. So this is more of it was in these buildings here. At least, so I've never visited this place yet in my life as Tony, but it's exactly how I remember it from those days. All three of those buildings were leased for a short time, and it was myself and maybe a dozen other kids, about a dozen total of kids that went through this. And what it was, they would do something painful to us. They had sleep deprivation. They gave us drugs, and then they hung us in chairs with things shocking us on our head, with helmets that had electrodes that shocked us, and we watched movies. And the movies had really fast subliminal messages in them, and they were a combination of cartoons, kids' cartoons, and then like animals being slaughtered, and just trauma stuff. And so that happened most of the time, and then, they started with the sleep deprivation. They started every 15 minutes at night waking us up, and I totally lost track of time and what happened after that. But the end result of that program was that if we were shocked we felt an electrical shock, we would stop whatever we were doing and we would await a command. So if I was in the middle of being hysterical and I was shocked, then I would just stop what I was doing, and whatever command I was giving next, I would just obey it. And that's basically what that program had done. At the end of it, he did it. We did a bunch of tests, and he said, congratulations. He pulled us in and said, you qualified for Theta. He said he didn't think anybody in the program had it in them to do that, but apparently it was intuitive service or psychic service. And we went on, and he brought actual people that were versed in meditations and certain techniques that I found since then to be offshoots of the Monroe Institute methods of out-of-body experiences. So if you can, these are all things you can look up for yourself, but I remember going through classes of that. And what they ended up doing was they would give us an IV. bag, and we would lose consciousness. And apparently, while we were under, we could channel entities or other spirits. I don't know, but we would give them information from past and future events. So it was an information gathering device, is ultimately what we were turned into from that program. One day, out on that runway, one of these pulled up, and all the kids and a few hundred people hopped in. This is the closest rendition. I've just grabbed this off the internet of a TR-3B search, but I remember that it had these slats in it, and we went out. It was on the runway. We walked up the staircase that had been rolled up to it, and it took us to the moon. And I took this slide from Dr. Salla's exopolitics.org. It's a great website, great source of information. There have been other witnesses that saw that building as well. And we pulled up to that building, and the pilot, as we were getting close, it kind of gave some history about it. It was just being finished back then, so that would have been late '82. And he said that they saved a lot of money by using the same designs that from the Pentagon, that the Pentagon was built to such strict standards that it was actually easy to convert it to a building that could be in space, that could hold atmosphere, that could be in as a vacuum. And they made it that shape. So I went on there. We got off the ship, and there was an underground hangar behind it. We got off the ship and went in, and they performed a couple surgeries on us. And I went right back to Inyokern a day or two later. This is back to Inyokern. So from Inyokern, we were allowed to rest, finally sleep after weeks of sleep deprivation. They loaded us all up on a green bus and took us over to China Lake, which is the next facility over. We rode a bus over. This was back in '82. There were a lot. I assume it was an Air Force facility. There were a lot of airplanes that were on pedestals. And we went into. Everybody was kind of, they weren't in your typical Air Force uniform. They were in formal dress, like it was an administrative building. And we went into the elevator, and there was an officer with us, and other people in the elevator, and five of us kids. And he said, "Don't talk to the doctor." He said, "Wait a minute." And when those other people got off the elevator, he put a key in and hit a code on the numbers, and the elevator kept going down. And when it opened up, it was a train station underground. And there were business people and military people that got on there. I was only on the train about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and I went from Southern California to Montana. We came up right around Helena, Montana. And the billionaire that owned me at the time, his wife picked me up and drove me back to Seattle, Washington. So this is another area where people always want names and dates, and I've found it, and I've since returned. So this is one of the better pieces of evidence in my account, which I didn't want to believe it. When I remembered everything in 2015, I didn't want to believe it either. And when I found the house, and then I went, "Oh my God, that's real, it happened." I wanted help, and I reached out to researchers. And Dr. Salla researched me, Rob Potter researched me, and a person named Morgan Starr researched me for about a year, and it was like heavy grilling that they put me through. At the time here, it was that island, it was Vashon. I call it Vashon, but the locals call it Vashon Island. There was a house there, and I was taken there. It was a private home. And the billionaire, and he was a practicing Satanist. Unfortunately, another supporting piece of evidence for my account is that in 2015, nobody had connected any kind of pedogate stuff, any kind of Satanism, to any part of government. And what he was doing was throwing fundraisers for local politics. And during the day, thousands of people would come to the property. And at night, he was having parties that were basically like your pedogate stuff, and filming people from a distance so that they could bribe them. And so this is something that I brought out, I testified to in 2015, and to my knowledge, nobody else said anything about it prior to that, at least as far as being connected to the secret space program. At that time, that weekend, so I was there a few days, she kept me in a dog kennel, and other kids showed up, and then he showed up, the guy that owned me, and they had a ritual human sacrifice. And what they did with myself and two of the other kids, there was another child that they had murdered, and And it was like a communion, like you had to eat them. And so my Gaia interviews cut all that stuff out, so sorry if it's dark. But after the sacrifice, so that it kind of looked like that. And afterwards, that also, I had never had any real experience with Satanism, but some of the researchers that grilled me for that year went and researched and knew about the rituals of Satanism, and it happens basically exactly how I'm describing it here, that they're naked with masks. I'm sorry, it's still hard to talk about. Afterwards, they got dressed and they put us kids on tables and they gave us the IVs. We were carrying our IVs with us. And they put us under. And the other kids went under first and they started saying, crazy stuff, The one girl started just kind of blabbering out. And then I lost consciousness and woke up, and they were just on top of the world the next day. And apparently we worked. So whatever purpose they had trained us for, it worked. And so the next morning I was shipped out to, an airplane came, he had his own runway, and a private propeller airplane came and took me, and I went to Porto Tawantinsuyo. Did I do this again? I'm having a hard time with this power switch, man. Porto Tawantinsuyo, Peru. So the plane flew to Dallas, and I stayed the night on the plane, and then the following morning we got up and flew to this small town in Peru, which I was also disappointed to find out exists exactly how I remember it. There I was offloaded with a briefcase. There was only one guy there that spoke English. He was a younger guy, and he was my handler. And I stayed there for 2.5 years after that. And what was happening was that they were manufacturing cocaine. Along this area is basically where most of the world's coca grows. And they were manufacturing cocaine and then bringing it on the rivers to the town over here and storing it. And when they had a plane load about once a month, they would fly it to Santa Marta, Colombia. And it's my understanding that prior to me being there, the plane crew went down and they lost a plane, so that they got a hold of whoever owned me or whatever organization and paid for me to be there. And what would happen is they would load up the plane and they'd put me on it and they'd lay me down and I'd put the IV in after we got up in the air. And I was like a canary in the coal mine to them. So I would let them know if the weather was bad or if we were off course or whatever was going to happen, or if there was police. And then I would wake up in Santa Marta, Colombia. It would wear off after they unloaded and we'd fly back. The very first trip, apparently all I said was gibberish, and they were going to kill me. They weren't even going to put me back. They said they were going to feed me the piranhas. And so they called, and the whoever was in charge of me, and they sent a silver mesh blanket that had EMF blocking. And they said that the electronics from the airplane interfered with whatever state of mind that I was in when they put me under. And they wrapped me in an EMF blocking, basically a silver blanket. And the second trip that I went, when they did that, when I woke up from that trip, his attitude was completely different. And after a few more trips, everybody in the entire village was completely different. He said that there were times that I spoke fluent Spanish, and I don't know Spanish. He said that I spoke to him as if I was his dead grandmother. And after a while, after a few months of that, the people from the town, he would have an entire few pages of questions to ask me while I was under. So whatever technology that is, that's what was going on. There's the town. This square, I remember, was being built after our first trip. They said that the money from that paid for the excavation to happen for them to build that plaza in the town. So I've researched going there. I want to go there. I'd love to go back there, but everything I've learned about it is that particular area of Peru is very much like the Wild West. There's a lot of illegal gold mining, and there's still a lot of cocaine production. And if you go there as a gringo and don't speak Spanish, you stand a good chance of getting hurt. So I have not gone back under the advisement. A friend of mine from Peru, and I begged him to take me. And another friend of mine who I've done interviews with has been to Porto Maldonado, the next town over. And they all say the same thing. You don't go there. You need to learn Spanish, and you need to know what you're doing. So I have not gone there, but that's a piece of evidence. That thing was built right around early '83, right after our first shipment there with the money from the first shipment. So, and then I had a small place. I think I would meet him there. I was over here somewhere, one of these places. and I had a little black and white TV and a room with a bathroom, and they would bring me food, and basically that was my life. And after going through the trauma mind control program, they called me, and I told them that I'd been to the moon for the surgery. I said that there's a base on the moon. I told my handler that. So they called me Los Loco Pequeño de la Luna, the crazy boy from the moon. That was what everybody called me in the town there. So after a couple years of that, I think I have the flight path. There's the plane. It was a C-46 commando plane, and I remember crawling up through all the instruments here. It was like, got scratched. It was scratchy. There was a lot of stuff here, and being able to look out that window once. And I remember that they always called it the commando. It was a C-46 commando. This is an artist rendition of what was taking place. So, like again, they had me wrapped in a blanket. He would put an IV in right after we got off the ground. He'd put an IV in, and right over the state of Acre. So right when you leave Peru, north of there is the state of Acre. Right as we were about to leave the state of Acre, he would give me the drug, and I would lose consciousness. That was the flight path. I want to say it was about 10 hours total, but honestly, I'm not entirely sure. But basically, I remember coming down in Santa Marta, Colombia, and that's where they would unload. And they were always uneasy about the people they met there. Racially, the people in Peru hated the people in Colombia, or at least in that town. That's what my handler said. They hated people in Colombia. So after about 2 years of that, right around puberty, right when I started to hit puberty, I lost the ability. Whatever the ability was, I lost it. And when they put me under, I didn't have any kind of insight. So they sent me back. And a military plane, like a cargo plane, came and picked me up. I went back to the island in Seattle, and that's when, so I would have been about 13 till 16 in that 20-year span. And that's when those parties were taking place, the fundraisers. I went back there in 2016, and I was in contact with Dr. Salla while I was on my trip, and it was right after the Mount Shasta conference in 16 when I did my first set of interviews with Dr. Salla for Exopolitics. And I was in contact with him, and freakishly, I can prove it with my family that I'd never been to Seattle or Washington State ever in my life as Tony. But when I was there, and especially when I was on that island, I knew my way around it. It was freaky. It was just the strangest, most surreal experience that I knew that beach. I went there, and I remember her taking us there in my 20 and back, and us kids throwing rocks at each other at the beach. And they were smaller rocks here, and when you got around the corner, they were bigger rocks. But I knew that before I'd ever set foot there, So it was just a freaky thing. And by those memories of my trip there being accurate, I also have to trust that my memories of the space-time were accurate as well. I thought that when I went to Seattle, when I went to Vashon Island, and that I would get surprised and say that, I would see for myself that a lot of what I remembered was vague. And entirely the opposite was true. A lot of what I remembered was accurate, freakishly accurate. So much that I could tell that things that were built up since then. Let me see where I'm going. So that's a picture I found from a news clipping of one of the parties. About 5,000 people would show up during the day, and 8 or 9 at night, everybody would leave. And later on, close to midnight, it would be a different party, and it was political people, a few hundred people, and they had girls on a stage and us boys, and we were basically sex slaves for them. Boys would come and go that stayed in the home. They kept us away from the girls. That went on. They had a calendar of events that was nothing like the calendar events that you and I know. Most of the time in the summer, it wasn't like an everyday thing, that there was the abuse. And most of the time we were just kids. We did calisthenics, and we had a swimming pool. It was a big house. It was about a 6,000 square foot house. And we just lived there like orphans would. It was like being an orphan kid. But, 4 or 5 times during the summer, in the summer months, they had holidays that they would throw these parties. And it was based on, there's no way to sugarcoat it, based on a satanic calendar, a satanic religion. So let me go back there. So what happened was every day we were taking a couple pills and doing calisthenics, and we were on a tight diet. We didn't eat a lot of food, and then the rest of the day we could just lay around and do whatever we wanted. We had games. It was like being in an orphanage. One day they changed the pills, and Something apparently I was allergic to. I'm allergic to a few things. And by the third day, I was vomiting back up. I couldn't take the pills. And I asked her to call and see if they could change back to the old stuff. And she said, nope, if you can't handle these pills and do what you're supposed to, you're going to be sold to the military. And that's exactly what happened. About 2 weeks later, she drove me to the back, like behind a Walmart. It wasn't a Walmart, but behind a big store in the back, and behind it. And 2 men in a van came, military guys, and they gave me an injection. And I lost consciousness. And when I woke up, I was back on that big ship again, looking at my way on my approach to this building again on the back of the moon, which is basically a joint German Draco base. Without getting too far ahead of myself, that's what it is. There's a military base. The LOC is farther away from this one. It's a separate base altogether, but there's its infrastructure on the back of the moon. I went there and was trained more of the same, like the movies, like kind of like drugs and movies. And it was military training was consisted of only a couple things. It was fight or flight response. Everything that I saw was to train me to not run from a life and death situation. They were drilling out. It was a mind control program that got rid of fight or flight response, because ultimately I wasn't being trained to be a soldier. I was trained to be a support soldier. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Mars colony program, or like I said, not many people know about Randy Kramer, but he said he supports my testimony. And a lot of the artwork that I sent that I had done of the bugs, I sent it straight to him, and he said, yeah, he confirmed it. That's exactly what they look like, and other people have confirmed it as well. So after that training was done, there was about a dozen of us kids. They put us on a transport and took us to a separate base on the moon. They marched us. It was U.S. military personnel, and they marched us down. We went down elevators and through hallways that were unremarkable. There were lines on the walls, but it basically looked like an office building kind of corridor. And when we got to a door at the end, the guy handed us little canisters that were about the size of a Red Bull can with a red button on top. He said, once you walk through that door, those are going to be armed, and as soon as you hit that button, it will detonate and you will die. And anything next to you will die. So use it well and try to save someone's life. Those were our instructions. We stood there in line. He said, eyes on shoes, I think is what he said. We weren't, look down. And we waited 15, 20 minutes. The door opened up, and it was a basketball-sized arena, like about a basketball court size. And it had a couple inches of like beach sand on the floor, and it was concrete. And you couldn't see because of the way the lights were shining, but there was a crowd. There were spectators, and they were yelling at us. We went in one door, the door closed behind us. There were like I said, about a dozen of us kids, all in teen years, later teens. And the door opened on the other side, and one of those came out. And that was about 4 feet tall by about 10 to 12 feet long. I guess it weighed 400 pounds. It was terrifying. It came out on the other side about a basketball court's distance away and made some sounds. And when it moved toward us, it would move slow. It would move slowly. And when it got close, we were all kind of positioned each other. We were pushing each other to get in front of us. We were all in a panic. And one kid from the left just ran right at the thing and detonated that bomb that he was given. He was blown in half, and the head of that thing was blown pretty much off. And it died. The crowd cheered. The doors that we came in opened up, and technicians came in. I was told later that kid lived, even though he was literally blown in half. They told us that he had lived. We went in and got medical examinations afterwards. We slept in our medical, like in a gurney, like we slept in the medical beds. And then the next morning we were taken on another transport to Mars. As soon as I was on Mars, we unloaded, and I got on a smaller ship, and we were taken to a forward base, it was called, and it was largely abandoned. It had the ability to have 200 or 300 people in it, and there were maybe 50 or 60 people there. It had been abandoned, and it was a remote place. So there were 5 levels of it, and on the lower level was where we were, and there was a cafeteria in the middle, and it looked like office space, and they had converted office cubicles for us to sleep in with cots there, and then we had a communal bathroom across the hall. I was there a couple months, 6 weeks to a couple months, we did 3 missions where basically we went out this side of this door and hiked during the day. We had environmental suits that were white, and we would be escorted with soldiers who had like an armor suit that was camouflaged. And the soldiers had negative buoyancy, which means in the gravity, their suits weighed them down enough to where they walked and ran and jumped exactly like they would on Earth. They were weighted so that they felt like the same ratio of weight that they would be on Earth. We were lighter, so that if you started to run, it would devolve into kind of a series of hops, and it was hard to do. We couldn't move as fast. It was less comfortable than the soldiers had. The first two outings, I went on 3 hiking missions, basically 3 missions. The first 2 were uneventful. The third one, we had, I don't want to get into. I always waste a lot of time on Mars, and it eats up the later years. But we were engaged by the bugs. There were fatalities. We got split up. There were 6 of us that were in white suits like me and 2 soldiers. 3 of them died. At the time, one of those, the bug like I showed you earlier, the big spider one, bit my arm off at the time and held me down, and the other 2 guys in front of me were killed. That's kind of the terrain, and we ended up, like I said, it devolved into a hop where you would get running and hop, and then fall down and then get up and do it again. When I was there, this came up to me, a mantid, and a lot of people have reported meeting a mantid at some point or another. I think there are many different kinds of them. It came up to me, and the other one was holding me down, and I remember just begging it, don't kill me, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, please don't kill me. And I was in a panic, I was in complete shock. And when it came face to face, it came close to me, I went into a dream state. I lost the pain from my arm being severed, and I went into a dream state, and what happened was I was standing with it in Inyokern at the airbase where I went through that trauma-based mind control, and it was explaining what it saw to something else. Like, it was like a dream where it was standing, like it would be standing here and explaining to somebody else that I didn't know was there what it saw. And we went from the Inyokern, we went to the house in Seattle, we went to the moon base, it showed, and then at the very end, it took me to my house that I grew up in back in Ipsy, which I had no memory of. At the very end, it took me there in my living room, and I was standing there and it said, this is who you are, is what it said. And I had no memory of what, at the time, I didn't know what I was looking at. He said, this is who you are. And I woke up, and it was like back to the pain and everything, and it walked away. And so it let me live. You could tell that there were 3 or 4 different kinds of insects, and you could tell that they were communicating with each other just by like body language, but I couldn't understand, it's not like I heard them talking. And the smaller ones had said something to it, and it turned around and said a kind of motion like, okay, and it bit my foot off. It bit my foot. So the soldiers had auto tourniquet technology in their suits, and we had just one auto tourniquet on us. It was about the size of a pack of cigarettes, and it had a cord on it. You'd pull the cord out, put it on you, and hit a button, and it would tourniquet. So I used the one on my arm, and I crawled up to and they took off. They moved in unison, and they were gone just as fast as they came. I auto tourniquet, got another one and put it on my foot, and the other 2 soldiers came and got me. And they were slapping me to keep me awake and said I couldn't go to sleep, and they hiked me back to that door. And as soon as I saw the door to go back in the base, they let me pass out. And this is kind of a contentious thing where a lot of researchers want more info that I just don't have. I passed out when I saw the door, and when I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, and I had my arm and my foot back. So what method they did that, if it was a whole, I don't know. They grew it. Randy says that they have holographic beds that can, like, print your arm out. I don't know. I can't confirm or deny it, but I woke up, and I had my arm and my foot back. At that point, they determined that the bugs had adapted to the program faster than they expected, and they canceled it. Excuse me. And we sat around for a matter of weeks there with nothing to do. And a transport came and got us, and I went to a larger underground city on Mars that was basically domes that was under the dirt and taken in. And it looked like, when they processed us, it looked like a resort. There were palm trees, there was a water feature, there was a water fountain. It looked like any kind of resort that you would go to in Vegas, but it was under a dome. It took us to, I went there, and then the officer that had me escorted us, handed me off, and it was back to schooling where I took aptitude tests to see, they were tall grades that tested us. I took aptitude tests to see what kind of job I would be good for, and I went into repair, machine repair or ship repair. And then that was a series of classes, and the classes were looking at a screen, and it would give you a movie, and then it would ask you questions, and all you had to do was look at the answer for a few seconds, and it would blink, is this your answer? And you just stayed looking at it, and that was the testing. There was no writing involved. And that went on for weeks that I did that. Then they loaded us up on a train. There were businessmen. It was a different train system than anything I'd seen before. There were civilians, mostly, like they looked like businessmen that got on it, and the train, and everything was kind of reddish, like that was the theme. And the train kind of lifted off and was a maglev and took off, and there was like a bright flash, a poof. And it was disorienting when we woke up, after the poof, and then the train immediately started stopping. And when the door opened and I got off the train, there was a huge hangar, and they were Germans. It was Nazi Germans. There were hundreds of soldiers there that were arriving, and there were people like me. And there was a guy that handed us the pamphlets, and he said when we were called on, we were going to read our oath that we were slaves. He said last month we got slaves, and a few of them didn't want to read it, and that's where we took them over there and shot them. And he pointed, and there was it looked like a blood stain on the concrete that was dried up. He said, is anybody going to get shot today? And we all just sat there and he said, good, now line up over there, and when you're called on, read the paper. And it was in German. That happened, and then there was an intake. I went and got a medical exam, got my hair cut, and I reported. They put us in, the only way for me to describe it is like a prison. Imagine, if you imagine what you've seen a prison look like, but without the bars, without doors. It was built just like that, but there were no doors. There were no bars to hold you in. You could come and go as you pleased. But I reported there, and that's where I lived for the next 12 years. And I worked on, let me see. So those are the big doors I spoke about earlier. That's what they looked like on the inside of the cold trap. And the Germans had found those doors existing. They found that system that was already there. And the hangar system was so vast that sometimes those doors would get stuck open, and not all the air would get let out. You could still, for hours, that the air could go out at that rate, but it was such a big area that they had pumps of air that you would, that the pressure would lower, there would be lower oxygen, you'd get headaches and things, but there would still be enough air in there. That's how big of a complex it was. That's the other side of Alhana Mons, and that's the crater I spoke of. So from the best of my knowledge, it was in one of these bigger craters down in a cold trap. In that area was where the entrance to, and that was a military entrance. I learned later on that there were many entrances to several different hangars, but this particular one, which was the radio handle, was Pyramid Base, was the military one. This is not exactly what it looked like, but it's an artist rendition going off what I did, what I described. There were a lot of these, whenever they found, they were looking for water. There's water on Ceres, and they would drain out large caverns. And they said that they were looking for technology, so basically ancient ruins inside the water. But they would drain out a cavern and begin building human, normal-looking buildings inside of it. But again, there were these were smooth, and these were long corridors that would have buildings in them as well. And they were always kind of like a trapezoid shape and smooth. Let's see, I have a different slide in here. So here they are again. That's kind of this is more what they looked like. So Ceres was entertaining ETs. So there were different forms of currency there. People there worked and had money. The Germans there were really big on the 30-year war in the 1600s. And to them, according to their history on Ceres, that was the first time that humans from Earth had defeated militarily an influence of an extraterrestrial origin. That the 30-year war, when basically they overthrew the Catholic Church and was able to be the Presbyterian religion. I think the Amish started right then. The scenes from the war were on the back of the money. They had German generals you know, with the guys with the spiked helmet, and on the back they would have scenes from the 30-year war back in the 1600s on the money. But the reason I say that they were entertaining extraterrestrials is because they would do that to try to court them to make trade deals with. And one of the caverns, so this is an artist rendition, it's not exact, but one of the caverns had a replica of a European city. I believe it was Copenhagen, I'm not entirely sure. But in the entire city inside one of the caverns was a pretty accurate replica of a European city, so that it was like a tourist attraction. The entire place had gravity plating, so you're talking about millions and millions of square feet, miles and miles of electrified flooring that created gravity, and the gravity field went about 30 feet up. So there were transports that would get lifted people would get on a transport, and it would lift up above 30 feet, and then it would be weightless and go to the other end and then dock and be brought down into the gravity, and people would get off of it. That was a lot of their public transport was like that. But again, everything had artificial gravity because it's a small planetoid. The hangar bay, this is, again, an artist rendition. I'm not much of a sketch artist, but there were often ships that were badly damaged being worked on. The one on the left here, I remember seeing it, and I remember thinking when it had scaffolding that the damage had to be pretty bad. All the ships that they had, the trade ships, the cargo ships, and the military ones, once they were turned on, they never landed again. They were always weightless. Our ship, my ship that I ended up serving on, I was a cargo engineer, was called the Max von Laue, Ceres colony, Gesellschaft Max von Laue. It was hard capped at 10 meters above any surface, so they couldn't physically drive it into the ground. The computer would stop it from doing that, and so for a ship to be on scaffolding, it was pretty badly damaged and unoperational. But the hangar bay was made up of miles and miles of like this, one long corridor with like bays that ships were pulled into. At the end of the hangar, there were times when we got off the ship, we would go, and there was a train system there. One train would take us right back to where I slept, that prison area, and there was another one that connected to the main train system that take you anywhere in the planet. Sometimes, some friends of mine that are coworkers, we would walk, and it was a mile and a half, 2 miles to this area, and there were revolving doors. And the reason we liked walking that was because once you walked through that door, there was proper oxygen on the other side, so you'd feel kind of exhausted. And once you got through that door, that first few breaths was kind of like a rush because it was oxygenated. The hangar, as I said, always had the doors opening and closing. It had a low oxygen environment. Right before I left, the year that I left, they were in the middle of carving those horses out of the columns that were natural columns formed, and they had brought in artists, and they were working on it for quite some time. Again, the theme for the Germans on Ceres was horses and the 30-year war in the 1600s. The train system kind of looked like that. Mark is a great artist. The guy at work, Mark Hallisey, is a great guy. But he drew this corner. It wasn't like that. But trains would pull up, and there was a glass door that would open, and when it did, you had to stand behind this line because it would suck air in. They were in a vacuum tube, and if you were anywhere in this line, you could get sucked in and get hurt. There was a big whoosh when the door opened, and then the train doors would open. And every train stop had a map of the planet, and it would show you the train routes and the different cities that were there. And it was quite often they added new ones. It was under constant construction and constant expansion. Real estate was a big deal to them. They were always expanding. That's just another artist area. There was a long corridor that went to one of those bigger ones that was like a city area. And I used to walk that quite a bit. And there was running water. In here, there was like a river that this bridge went over. There weren't cars. The police and the EMF people, the emergency services, had little 6-wheeled carts, electrical carts that they drove around, but nobody had their own car that was there. So it's hard to explain, but basically as a slave that I wore a collar and I wore a jumpsuit that identified me as such, opened up a lot of ridicule when I went into public places. I quite often, if I was on a train and there was a seat and I was sitting down and there was somebody that came on, that didn't have a seat available, they would make me get up and get to the back of the train. When I went into public areas, when I went into the city areas, I was basically constantly under the threat of being abused because I was a slave. It was very humiliating. So as a result, I stayed in places that were kind of out of the ordinary. And one of the first places I went to was a joke from one of the officers on the ship that told me when I went into town for the first time to go to the red light district. And I didn't have any idea what he meant by that, and I did. And it's a long story, but I was basically given free access to a club there, a bar that was basically like a brothel, like a strip club in the red light district. And I could go there and just sit there and drink waters, and I didn't have to pay. And so I would go there in my spare time. And, the girls that were working there were slaves as well, and I was just one of them. So I would go there, but this is the foyer to that. And the reason why it's significant is because that piece of art, this thing, had zero gravity in it. It was an area where they just turned off the gravity of the floor. And it would shoot fire, balls of fire would go in it, and they would make a ball of, it would, like a butane gas, I don't know, but it was a fire, and it would pop and then shoot across the thing, and then it would shoot balls of water, and they would kind of mingle, and then every few minutes the gravity would come on and the water would splash, and it would start again, they would shoot. And I remember just being mesmerized by that thing. I would sit and look at it as long as I could, but in the foyer, whenever somebody else came in, they said, you're a slave, you can't be here, get in there, either leave or get in there, whatever you're going to do, you can't just stay here. So this was an existing structure. One of the caverns that the Germans had emptied water out of had rooms in it. And these doors that opened up were existing. These catwalks were not. The Germans built that, and they built the elevator system, and it went quite deep. There was a friend of mine that I would go visit, and took about 40 minutes for me to get there. And it was about a 15-minute train ride and about 25 minutes of riding lifts down is how deep it went. It went basically for miles down vertical. The doors looked like that. Those were, like I said, those were existing. The Germans had found those, and they converted the inside of those to apartments. And the doors worked telepathically. So you could walk up to the door and think, I'm here. And it would let the person on the inside know, and they could grant you access, and they could even tell you to go away. And I was told that they could even cause you pain, that they go away, and if you didn't leave, it could actually cause you to have headaches or bad headaches until you left. So, and then it would slide to the side and open up. So at the end of my time, I was taken on a disc back to the moon and put through a regression process that a lot of other people in the 20 and back described as well. Basically, they made me stay still it felt like weeks, and they gave injections every day of some drug or whatever, but I wasn't allowed to move. They said if you moved, you could injure yourself. And then at the end of it all, when it was done, they kind of put me in a machine, and it was painful. And I woke up back in a base, I believe on the moon base here, with my old memories, now with no memory of the 20 and back, but my old memories again. So I've speculated it's my theory that they're doing it with cloning, that they can clone a person, and the clone is kind of a vegetable. They can't really get up and walk around, and they take, Randy Kramer calls it quantum superfluid consciousness, that they can take your consciousness out, or at least partially, so that you still go live your life, and put it in the clone, and then it goes and lives, and then they can just kill the clone, or whatever they do to it, and the consciousness returns naturally. And so that, the time travel component, who knows what's going on with that. I'm only speculating. Like I said to some people earlier, you can go for kidney surgery. That doesn't mean you know how to do kidney surgery when you wake up. My 20 and back was kind of the same way. There's a lot of questions that I have unanswered that I can only speculate. But I think that they are using a cloning technology. I think I was a clone during that time. And let me see if this is the next slide. So after the 20 years, not only myself, but others, and I don't want to name them for whatever copyright infringement, but other people that have experienced 20 and backs that have come forward, all have regained their memory of the process well after the 20 years. So over here. So, like I said, I had bits and pieces through here, but that didn't make any sense. But I didn't get the real memory recall until really 2015, when it all kind of came in big chunks and it solidified into a full, the full memories that I could remember from A to B. And that's how it happens. So I think that there's definitely a consciousness thing that goes on. Right around the year 2000, about 18 years after it, I woke up one day and I kind of got my act together. So after that person, whatever, died or was put back, I had a deep personality change in my real life at that time. And it really wasn't until then that I got organized and became an adult. I was kind of a basket case before that. So I think that's part of it. I think that they're borrowing part of your consciousness and driving clones with it. And I think that at some point that when you remember things, it's not stored in the body, that there's somewhere else that all our memories are stored that I have access to. Again, I had an MRI in late April of 15, and about 2 weeks after that is when I had the big memory recall. There's a thing called the Mars records, if I say his name right, is Michael Ralph, that had the same thing. He had an MRI, and then he recalled service on Mars as well. So it's a coincidence, it's worth mentioning, and that's how it happened to me as well. Since then, since I've done interviews, I've been contacted by about 2,000 people that all have similar experiences or similar memories of serving in a secret space program and being put back. All of them, most of them don't have all the details, or it's hard for them to put together, a string of 10 years of memories, or at least they don't want to talk about it. But like I said, about 2,000 people have reached out to me so far, and I still get about 2 a week, and that have memories of going through some kind of service. And it's kind of like everybody has the same kind of side effects from it. And I found that when you get into a diagram like this, when I ask them, when did it start? And then I roll the clock forward 20 years and say, now, okay, so if that was in 1990, what happened in 2010? Do you have anything? And most of them go, wow, now that you mention it, I did have a life change. Like usually about 20 years later, in their real life down here, they have some other personality change that happens, because essentially that other self that's coexisting with it on the timeline dies. And so that's what I found in my own research. That was me. This picture was taken the weekend after, so that was April of '82. My dad snuck out and took pictures of me playing out in the yard. So I found this, and I thought, I can remember that because that next day when I went to school, I was a completely different person. I was a completely different kid. I had no memory of the 20 and back, but I was not a kid anymore. And I didn't have, I remember playing in the driveway that weekend. And now that I look at this picture, and I was wondering what the hell happened to me. The next day I went to school, when I went to use the bathroom, and it's not a big school, and I went there my whole life, but I didn't remember where it was because of the sensation of being gone for 20 years was real. Like I woke up and had breakfast with my parents the next morning, and I was back in my life, and I thought, I haven't seen you guys in 20 years. And my older sister said, don't be stupid, we just had dinner last night. But I remember sitting there with that sensation of being returned into my life that was after all that time. I think that's it. So there's a website. I'll make that available with all my interviews. If this one goes on YouTube, I'll put that there. Links to all my interviews. I've done 60 or 70 by now and counting, and I try to keep them all on a website. I don't do this for money, and I don't have a website. I'm not promoting anything. I am working on a book because there's demand. I get asked for it a lot. That was me. I went to Gaia Studios. I was on season 13 of Cosmic Disclosure. They cut out all the satanic stuff because they've had their own, their own issues with it. But it's heavily edited. But Gaia was good to me. It was a good experience. Jay Widener also said that, I think Jason Rice, if none of you are familiar with him, he was on the season prior to me. I had never met him or heard any of his info, but a lot of the things that he said, I told Jay as well, and Jay told me that. There's Randy Kramer and George Norrie. I went and taped last year for George Norrie's Beyond Belief. I don't think it's aired yet. I don't even know if it will air. The interview was kind of really fast-paced, and it's hard to explain anything. So anybody that doesn't know my story, I think, would be lost in that interview. But it may have aired. I don't know. That's the car she was in. So I wonder, my original slideshow of this, I still have a few minutes. Okay. My original slideshow presentation, I did this in Australia, and I had given names. Because since then I found the CIA program that I went through in Inyokern. I found the funding from the CIA, the declassified online CIA library, and I found some stuff with the techniques we were taught. And so I went and edited out the names because it's just safer for my health to do that. But the people in charge of the program from the Institute I found, and they checked out to be exactly how I remember. So I put that there. That was at Inyokern. So this is a document. It's pretty blurry, but it's basically the funding for the, prior to the Gateway program for the CIA, which was remote viewing. It was an offshoot. The program I was in was called Project Grill Flame. So these are documents from 1982 dictating the funding and who would be in charge of it. That's the info. That's the website where I found a lot of info about Grill Flame. I don't know if you guys are just into it as a hobby or want to do any kind of research. I would tell everybody, research everything. You know, anything that I told you, if you're curious about it, research it. You can look me up on Facebook. I love answering questions. Hopefully we can do some questions today. 20 years is a lot of time, and to talk about it in an hour and a half, I leave a lot out. There's a lot of evidence that I leave out just for time. But this was a document about Grill Flame. This was a thing about Dr. Jolly West, who was involved in Grill Flame from the Stanford Research Institute. And what it does is it connects him to the MK Ultra stuff. And he pioneered, not only brought the MK Ultra to the remote viewing research, but he also pioneered sleep deprivation. So lo and behold, after I had talked about all that in 2015, I found this info about a year ago, tying them in. So there's more about West's work, and he said he figured out ways to do the trauma-based mind control based on sleep deprivation, and had, well, they don't say what happened, but they say he had tremendous results. And they also said there's a film where they said they had tremendous results with near-death experience with children, where they had tremendous results, but they didn't go into anything after that. There's some documents about there's a CIA declassified document about Project Gateway. I'll also try to make that available online to anybody who wants to see it. That's a really good read. What it does is explains how consciousness works based on Isaac Benthov's Swinging the Wild Pendulum book, which is basically married quantum mechanics with quantum consciousness theory, and explains how ESP works. There's the Monroe Institute focus chart on focus levels, where you can go into meditative states through hemisync techniques and do out-of-body and access past and future events. This is from the book, Isaac Benthov's Stalking the Wild Pendulum, I think is the name of the book. And what this says is that your consciousness, your brain right now has brain waves. And in a certain, when you're in focus one, which means hopefully you're all still awake. And if you're not sleeping, then you're in focus one. And when you go to sleep, you get to a focus 3 or 4. And when you get to a focus 10, you know, your brain waves start to take a different shape. And what happens is the smallest distance in our universe, because it's based on quantum holograph theory, the smallest distance is a Planck distance, kind of like resolution on a TV screen, only millions of times smaller, a Planck distance. And what happens when a brain wave, or your consciousness wave, begins to get to a certain frequency, when it changes direction, right here, it occupies less distance than a Planck. So it clicks out of time-space and gives you access to past and future events. And basically, that's the science behind ESP. People that can do remote viewing, people that can do, you know, all of it. There's a lot of research on it. You know, you don't have to look far if you put in ESP research. But basically, in a nutshell, that's how it works. The science behind it is that your brain waves at a certain state of mind, let me get back. At a certain state of mind, your brain waves happen so quickly that they change direction in less than a Planck distance and click out into beyond time-space. So that gives you access to the future or the past. So this is from the CIA document. Again, it's really a good read for anybody that's interested. It explains a lot of the science behind it. It also, this particular one just explains on some of the results they got when the Army they used Army personnel for the experiments. They got a lot of results about it. They found that they could go into an astral state, and they could go into remote view and find people, and if they did what was called color breathing, like basically in a dream state, if I went and found you, Miles, in the dream and imagined bathing you in the color blue, then you had a tangible, they would have somebody far away, sometimes on the other side of the country, and they'd have 2 or 3 guys go into that state of mind with drugs and with the hemisync tones, and they would go there and just imagine going over somebody and bathing them in the color blue. And what they found was that it lowered their heart rate, they felt less pain, and it would heal them. It would lower swelling. They would do it to people that were injured in combat, and it would relieve swelling. They also found that if they did it with the color red, they would cause heart problems, and they could induce swelling. And one of the researchers from the SRM, I'm not going to say his name, said that they were actually able to murder people doing that. There were other color breathings. I forget the other. But anyhow, this is a great read for anybody that's interested. And again, this is not just some random bullshit. This was off the CIA website of their declassified library. And these were things they did coincidentally back in '82. There's the cover of the book. And I'm done.
Thank you very much.
So thanks.
Thank you very, very much.
So if we have a few minutes, I'm okay with answering questions if anybody. I was fortunate enough to speak to the Houston chapter of MUFON last night with a Zoom meeting, and I gave them the same slideshow and basically said the same stuff, and I entertained questions, and the skeptical questions I like as well. I wanted my wife to prove me wrong in the beginning, and asked me all the questions she could. And so I entertain the questions. If anybody's curious about anything, feel free to ask.
Anyone have any questions?
Mention what's going on in the other room real quick, if they'd like.
Want to make sure everyone knows that you're welcome to go to the other room, enjoy the music and refreshments, or if you'd like to stay here, remain for a Q&A session with Mr. Rodrigues. This gentleman had a question?
What triggered the return of the memories of the 20 years, and what was that whole experience like? How did it all come back?
Sure. Well, again, there were some coincidental things that happened in succession in a matter of a 2-week period from the last week of April in 2015. Like, I always had vague memories, but they didn't make sense. I got an MRI, which, like I said, is in line with the Mars Records account, with that Michael Relf got an MRI and then recalled his service. But about 2 weeks later, I also saw the Exopolitics interviews with Randy Kramer, where he explained the time travel component. Because the things that I did remember flying over Ceres and looking out the window of the ship. I did remember that, but I always told myself, when could that have happened? I always had chronological memories of my life, like I can remember growing up and never being in space. And those memories in space, I have memories of being a professional, of having a job, of getting up and getting there. So I told myself, when could that have possibly happened? And I just shrugged it off. It must be a dream or something. Once I saw Randy Kramer's explanation of 20 and back, where they put you back in time. Not only do they take you for 20 years, but they put you back. And I went, oh, holy shit, that happened. Once I entertained and I accepted those memories, that then I could go back and remember the things that I had denied, that I had kind of, forced out, that I didn't entertain. Once I entertained them, big chunks, then it all came back. It came in big chunks, and it was very disorienting. I was kind of a basket case for 3 months, and I didn't want to keep it to myself, and I wanted someone to talk to. And I reached out to researchers, not so that I could go out and do interviews. I just wanted counseling. I knew that if I was going to go to a regular, I even looked in the book for counseling. And I knew that as soon as I went to a regular professional counselor, I was going to get in big trouble, to say any of this stuff. So I reached out to researchers in the field in hopes of talking to others in a way of counseling. And I ended up being asked to do interviews. And I've been doing interviews ever since. And talking about it has proven to be the best therapy. So anybody that goes through it as well, that's my advice, is find somebody you trust. If it's not a friend in your life, which it's usually hard to, find somebody online, do a whatever, Facebook, phone call, whatever, and talk about it. That's been the best therapy.
Thank you. Another question? I thought, we spoke a moment ago, and I've been into a lot of this type of stuff, and my question is, in the programs that you were in, has anybody ever told you, or was there any discussion about kind of like who's actually in charge of Earth? Like as far as like who's really running the show, if, you know, the surface population is not allowed to go into space, you know, unless they're like in a special club or military, like who's in charge here?
So I get asked that quite a bit. The answer that I have for you is definitely I don't know for sure. The Germans that I worked for what is called the Draco, who had their main base was around Jupiter. So there are several space stations around Jupiter that is close to a natural portal system that can access other galaxies. So ships can go extragalactic there. There was a base there by the Draco that the Germans answered to, and they had a treaty with, and that's kind of like who they worked for. And according to them, that's who had control of not only the Earth, but the whole solar system. That it was their territory, and everybody had to ask permission. But that's not how space works. A lot of people are, a lot of the lies we've been told that it takes a long time to get from A to B. You know, all our space shows show us it takes a long time to fly into another planet, and that's not the case. It's an instantaneous thing, and we came back every day at the end of the day. That was one thing. And then the other thing is that there's only a handful of ET races out there that are players in the political landscape, and that's not true either. There are billions of civilizations, and all on their own different level of technology. The ones that are higher, that have higher technology, just ignore the ones that have lower technology. The same way we do when we walk through the woods and we come across animals. We just ignore them and they go their way. We don't interact. And that's what's going on. They come into our solar system. If they need something, they need genetics, they need to come to Earth for an experiment or whatever it is, they do so, and they don't need to ask permission if they're on a certain level of tech. So, but below a certain level of tech, below the Draco level of tech, they are beholden to the Draco, who have a military presence. So, if that answers your question.
Hello, Tony.
Hello. Hi.
Man, it's mind-blowing.
It's a big pill to swallow, and I hate to talk to it. I don't like to force this info on anybody that doesn't answer.
It's great, man. It's always, it's something I felt. I have one quick question, but I don't want to hold up the time because I can. So, in terms of humanity, is there any kind of protection? Is there any kind of law? Is it any type of, are we just subject to whatever higher technology, extraterrestrials, we're just subject to them, and if they choose to do this or choose to do that, we're just like helpless like ants?
That's a great question, and that's the first time I've been asked that in front of a crowd. I have been asked that before. You know, without getting into like, you know, real spiritually going into that, because I think that everybody's intake of spiritual information is their own. You know, I don't want to affect your relationship with what you believe, but the answer to your question is what's the protection against that is us. You know, on a subconscious level, you're a higher mind than what we are when we interact with each other, and you have to give permission, and we do. The Earth as a whole is an entity, is an organism, and we are parts of it. We are part of it. So there is a level of protection. There is a level of permission that has to happen for anything to happen. You know, like I said, this takes my talk into a completely different direction to really go there with it. But, you know, I have my own personal beliefs. I'm heavy into the law of one. I believe in God. You know, I believe in a lot of things that just, you know, that I feel right with. You know, and that's what everybody should believe in. What they feel is right. What you feel is good. Not because somebody tells you it. But I think of us as, you know, we're being held back. Someone asked. Yesterday I got asked, how come in the last 50 years we've advanced so far? Are they helping us? Did the ETs help us? The truth is, for the last 2,000 years, they've held us back. They've been holding us back. We should have been advanced long ago, because that's what we naturally are. We're an advanced species. We're an advanced intelligence. And so we're catching up to where we should have been in the first place, and that's going to be our protection. You know, I say this too, if anybody's following it, is anybody here aware of the Artemis program? Artemis. Please look that up. NASA just announced in 2024 we're going back to the moon. Like the Apollo was a Greek god, his sister was Artemis, and that's the Artemis program. And in 4 years, we're going to have people on the moon. So I think the original plan for disclosure, and this is me completely speculating, this is not an official announcement or anything, okay? But I think the original plan to disclose ET, extraterrestrials, was to go to the moon and find artifacts. And at that point, we would go, look, there's artifacts here of somebody built a building here. And then we would be contacted by a Nordic race or a human-looking race that would come down and say, now you found evidences of it, now we can contact you. And that would spur it, to disclosure. And then they shot Kennedy, and they swept the whole thing on the rug. We did Apollo, nothing was found. Boom, we haven't gone back. Now I think the landscape has changed. People like me that came forward in the past got killed quick. And so there are a lot of people talking nowadays about it. And I think that all of a sudden, Artemis is just going to go back to the moon in a fucking election year on top of it. And Randy Kramer said that that's one of the plans to disclose, is that at the end of a presidency, that in the middle of a presidency, the president would look weak if he didn't know anything about it. How you were supposed to be briefed, you're president, you should know. But at the end of a presidency, the president can claim, I didn't know anything about it. And the next president can come and go, I didn't know anything about it either. Wow, we got ETs. And so it's a coincidence to me. It's kind of a telling sign that Artemis is in 2024 when we're going to be at the end of our next election. So that I think they're going to go to the moon, they're going to go to the South Pole, and I think they're going to disclose from the moon. And that's going to kick it off. And I think once that happens, a lot of people are going to, I think people are ready for it. I mean, face it. People are ready for it. It's not going to be a big a shock to the belief system as it would have been even 20, 30 years ago. I think we're ready now. So I think that's what's going to happen in 5-10 years. We're going to have the official account of it. Even though there's an infrastructure and we've been up there for a long time. There's 100 years we've been up there already. I think we're going to get an official announcement in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that'll be our best defense. Like you said, we're not just ants. We're an intelligent species. And subconsciously, we can direct the course of our own destiny. We choose our own destiny.
Any other questions?
I don't know if you've seen the movie Inception, where they dream within a dream within a dream, and they kind of go extract information.
Yep.
Have you ever heard of anything like that used for, going into people's minds?
Well, yeah. Yes. So not only trauma-based mind control, but there's with the grain-based mind control, where it's builds you up. There are levels of mind control all around us. We are all under some sort of influence of mind control, from the commercials, from the TV. There's talk of there's a wave in everything you watch on TV, that there's a wave. There's a wave that you can't hear that affects you and irritates you, and they unirritate you when the commercials come on, and when you're watching the show, the wave comes on and kind of has a light irritation, and then when they hit you with a product, the irritation goes away, so that you go, oh man, I want some Coca-Cola. Without I'm not pointing a finger, but there are versions of mind control around all of us that is very advanced, and it's very far away from what we even think is possible. As far as the Inception thing about going into dreams, that goes back to the Gateway Project. If you want to go and read up on just go to the CIA declassified.gov, I think it is. Go to that website and just put in Gateway, or do dream research, any of those things, and it'll uncover documents that go into that. But Gateway was a lot about that. They were getting soldiers and psychics into dream states and then having them remote view. And there's actually been quite a bit of documentation about it. It's a real thing.
I'd like to add the remote viewer pioneer by the name of Lynn Buchanan has a lot of things to say about that. I'm sure you've heard of Lynn Buchanan.
Thanks for sharing this with us. Just a quick question. You said it's about 2,000 people that contacted you so far since you came out about this. That's a lot of people, number one.
Right.
And are they all reporting the same thing, where they basically lived their whole life, but there's 20 years of missing time, that they felt they were away, and they have all these memories, but they don't kick back in? Then also the MRI experience. Have you ever had any additional MRIs or exposure to strong magnetic fields where you think it might possibly jog more memories?
You know, I looked into that. I actually wanted to build one, you know, for all these people that were coming forward that, you know, it's not like you can just walk into the hospital and make yourself have an MRI. It's a prescription-based procedure. As far as the 2,000 people, they all have different, many of them have completely different experiences. I think that that's a testament to how many different programs or how many different species and at different levels of technology are interacting with people on the earth. Some people have some people, their testimony is positive. They get taken and they have good things happen to them. And then some people have had worse things than me happen where you wouldn't believe some of the awful things. And a lot of people don't want to talk about it. They're just shocked by the things they remember. It's all across the board. Some people just have bits and pieces, fragments. I call them keystone memories. And some people remember quite detailed things. And I always tell them the same thing, write a timeline up, write it down, and write a timeline and go from there because your memories will keep coming if you want to remember. Now the other thing is, in the 20 and back, when I was going back, I wanted to remember. I did not want to forget my life there. And a lot of people on that I remember talking to over on the other side wanted to forget because they had witnessed bad things, you know, very bad things. So I think that affects your ability to recall as well. But yeah, I generally get about 2 people a week that have some kind of weirdness, you know, whether it's a memory like that, but that contact me and say, you know, is there any way you can help me remember? And it's usually the same stuff. I go back and forth with them about, you know, meditate, get your mind at a good place, get your diet right, and write down a timeline and just focus on the keystone memories, the things that you remember clearly, the clearest, and then more memories will come. And that seems to work for most people. There are other things. There's the hypnosis. There are some treatments. There's a Reiki version of it. They're doing that. I haven't done any of that stuff. I've had people volunteer to do it on me, but they want me to go out west, and it's like, you know, I have a normal life. So there are many different methods, but there's a lot of people. It's not just me, and it's not just 1 or 2 people. Like I said, there's 2,000 that I know of, and there's got to be plenty more than that. I'm not the most, I don't get the biggest hits on YouTube. So when you talk about when you get out to millions of people, there's a percentage, probably 3 or 4% of everybody that sees my videos reach out. So that means there's quite a bit of people that have had this happen.
Any other questions? I have one particular question. I believe it was Randy Kramer that claimed to have been made genetically produced because he had certain types of psychic abilities through that. Can you speak to these controllers, whoever do these programs, how they genetically select individuals to participate in the program?
Right. Well, absolutely. Like I said, they tested me for my genetics in the very beginning. And we had to wait there for quite some time to see if I had the genetics compatible to the tech that they were going to use. So it's like not everybody can go, at least for whatever program that they want. So certain types of enhancement require certain types of genetics. And as far as the life extending technology, the 20 and back or that, I don't know if everybody is capable of going for that. So in Randy Kramer's case and a lot of other people, they are manipulating their genetics almost from birth. Even some people prenatal, they're manipulating their genetics. You know, the MyLab programs are doing it prenatal. And then as the kids grow up, they're testing them and manipulating their genetics so that they can enter into the programs.
Okay, great. If there's any other questions, let's give Anthony Rodrigues a round of applause.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.